Severe flooding is wreaking havoc across Central and Eastern Europe following days of torrential rain. The situation in many areas is critical as more rivers burst their banks. At least 15 people have died across Poland, Austria, Romania and the Czech Republic, also known as Czechia, with southern Germany affected as well. The flooding is the worst some regions have seen for more than 20 years. Tens of thousands have been forced to flee the rising waters.
Across Central Europe, Storm Boris has filled the streets of picturesque towns with muddy sludge. Raging rivers have destroyed road and rail bridges, leaving towns divided. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has announced more than €250 million in funds to deal with some of the worst flooding in decades.
The Minister of Finance has assured me that there will be no shortage of money, whether for immediate or long-term aid.
In neighbouring Czechia, several people are dead and others missing after being swept away in their vehicles. Residents in the mountain town of Jesenik describe the impact of surging waters as an apocalypse.
The water was rolling in here. Mud got into our house. It's not so bad there, but this is a disaster. It's terrible, really terrible.
While much damage is already clear, many structures are still teetering on the brink of collapse, leaving residents to wonder if they can return to their homes.
2 meters of water ran through the street. There was a whirlpool that undermined the house, and who knows how it will end or if it'll need to be taken down or not.
Few parts of Czechia have been spared. Hundreds of thousands of homes have been left without power. Evacuation orders have been extended to major cities as defensive dikes fail and rivers break their banks. Many reservoirs have reached their capacity. This dam in Austria is approaching its limits, and the disaster is far from over, with more rain on the way. Sandbags are now the only hope for many on swollen rivers like the Danube. Major cities like Budapest could be next to face the floods.
Let's get more on this from Liz Bentley. She's Chief Executive of the Royal Meteorological Society in London. Welcome to DW, Dr. Bentley. Central and Eastern Europe, are they generally prone to flooding?
So we have seen flooding events in this part of the world before. That's not unusual, but I think on this occasion, it's the extent of the amount of rainfall that has fallen and over such a wide area. So it's covered, a number of countries, as you've shown in that report. Whole river catchment areas have been deluged in heavy rainfall. So I think it's the sheer amount of rain that's fallen and the extent to which the area it covers is unprecedented.
OK, so and what should we be ascribing these extremes to? Do we presume that it's man-made climate change?
Yeah, so we have a very stationary weather pattern called a cut-off low. These aren't unusual to get at this time of year in this part of the world. It means that a weather pattern just gets stuck and therefore rain just falls continuously for days on end. I think there are some signals, though, of climate change here. So we've had a very warm Mediterranean Sea this year, record-breaking temperatures in the Mediterranean Sea. That has fueled energy from the heat, but also more moisture in the atmosphere as that warm Mediterranean Sea has evaporated more moisture into the atmosphere. And we know a warmer climate, that the atmosphere can hold more moisture. So typically we've seen a 10% increase in the amount of moisture that the atmosphere can hold because of human-induced climate change, which means when we get these rainfall events, the rainfall is so much heavier, as we've seen over recent days.
So from what you've said, it sounds like this can be predictable. We look at what's going on in summer, and as you say, the extra energy in the weather systems. So downstream or further along in the year, we can expect these sorts of events. So presumably, we should now be planning for this.
Yeah, so that's right. So there's two things here. We know from our climate projections that these events are now more likely to happen than they ever have been before. We also have very good weather forecasts. So this particular event was forecast days in advance. So we have warnings that can be put out days in advance for local authorities to take action, but also for the public to take themselves away from these areas as best they can to put themselves out of danger. So I think this initiative to have more weather warnings, timely weather warnings, because we can't stop these rainfall events from happening, but we can provide information to the public when they're likely to happen. But also, as you say, planning for these things. We know we're going to get more of these events in future, so we need to have greater defences in place that can cope with them. So, for example, in Poland, the great floods they had in 1997, very devastating. There was a lot of funding went in to put flood defences in place. Those are now being tested by this particular event. And it will be interesting after we see the aftermath of this flooding event, how much those flood defences actually coped with this particular situation.
And as we see these extreme weather events, extreme heat in some places and extreme rain in others. This is going to sound like a bit of a weird question, but I've always wondered, are we looking at less rain overall? I'm just thinking that, does this mean that if we now start to build reservoirs and dam systems, that we can actually use this in some way in the future?
It's a little bit like famine and feast. So with our climate changing, we either have periods where we have too much rainfall, like we've seen over the last few days across Europe, or we have periods where we have too little rainfall, and we've seen the drought conditions across the southern half of Europe. So we have to become much better at managing those famine and feast situations where it's too much rain or too little rainfall.
Right, you put it much better than I could have. Thank you so much. Liz Bentley from the Royal Meteorological Society in London. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's take you to Austria now. Our correspondent, Giulia Saudelli, is in Lower Austria, close to the Camp Valley, which is one of the country's hardest hit regions. Welcome, Giulia. What have you seen there today?
Yeah, today has seen incessant rain all across this part of Austria, really without any break. This is the first moment, really, where we've seen an end to the rain. And where I'm standing is on the on the edge of the Danube River. It is very high. As you see, these are some protective barriers that have been put up to prevent the water from overflowing. But the situation here is quite calm right now. But we've heard that and we've seen that in the Camp Valley, which is further upstream from here, there has been quite a lot of flooding. There is a reservoir there that goes into the Camp River, and it was at risk of overflowing. So over the last couple of days, authorities have let gradually water come out of the reservoir, not to create a big wave, a big overflow, but that meant that downstream there was more water than usual coming down. So a lot of the towns in that area have seen flooding.
And how are people coping?
Well, people knew that a lot of rain was on its way, and authorities seem to have warned, especially local authorities, seem to have warned people that the situation could get bad. There were sandbags prepared, but that didn't really prevent water from creating damage. We were in a town earlier, about 30 kilometers from where we are now, and we found people cleaning up the cellars of their buildings because in the early hours of Sunday, water just came flowing through the streets of the town, went into a lot of the cellars where pretty much everything was damaged. So they were still cleaning out rubbish, and they were still cleaning out mud and water from there. So people are tired, but they're still ongoing with the cleaning up measures, and they hope it won't get worse now.
Right. So sandbags and reservoir overflows. What else was happening in the way of preparations?
Well, we've seen a lot of deployed firefighters working in the area, especially now to prevent anything worse from happening, because there is concern that with a lot of rain that fell throughout the day today, that the rivers can now become even more full, that the land, which is already full of all the water that has fallen in the last few days, could now not be able to absorb the rain that fell really heavily throughout the day. And there is fear that overnight and into tomorrow, tomorrow, more rivers might be overflowing. So we've seen authorities preparing for that, putting up more sandbags, and in some cases also evacuating some towns. There is a town downriver from where I'm standing, about also 30 kilometers away, where all 200 inhabitants are being evacuated this evening because there is fear that the water in the town might overflow and cause some severe flooding there.
OK, thanks for that, Giulia. Giulia Saudelli in Krems in Austria.
Viktória Bellová is a journalist in Bratislava, Slovakia, and joins us now from the banks of the River Danube. Viktória, thanks for joining us. Can you bring us up to date on what's happening where you are?
Hi, hello from Slovakia, from Bratislava. I'm standing next to Danube River, which has reached already 9 meters water level and is still rising. It's still dangerous, but as you can see behind me, the weather has stabilized. The conditions are better now, which is very revealing information for all of the forces here. The most affected part of the city is Devinská Nová Ves, which is a bit outside of the city. Devin is completely cut off, and only emergency forces are allowed to get there. Also, people are recommended to maybe leave the houses, go where it's safe, and it's because the two rivers are basically pumping to each other, and it's Danube and Morava. That's why the situation there stays very complicated. Also, in the city center, it's been very complicated because of the fallen trees and bad flood. Now the city should be stabilized, and as you can see behind me, people are already getting out and try to live their life again.
And Viktória, what about the other countries that are being affected by this?
So probably the most affected country is Poland, as it was said in the reportage before this interview. There were a couple of dead bodies found. There are many missing people in the Czech Republic. Also a very complicated situation in Budapest as well. We are expecting to get maybe more water from Vienna, as Danube is pumping there a lot. It stays very complicated, but the conditions have stabilized all over the region. So we are expecting a bit better conditions, a bit better weather. But still it stays very complicated. Maybe very interesting information is that Ukraine, which is in the middle of the war, has already offered some help to both Poland and Slovakia.
Journalist Viktória Bellová reporting there from Slovakia. Thank you so much, Viktória.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
We're joined now by Owidiusz Nicieja, a journalist at the Polish public broadcaster, TVP, in Głuchołazy in Poland. That's close to the Czech border. Thank you so much for joining us today. We can see some flooding behind you. Can you tell us how the situation is developing where you are?
Right, so this place, Głuchołazy in southern Poland, is one of the places that was affected the hardest in the wake of the flooding. This place yesterday was completely flooded. There was the water level here was about 2 meters high. So walking here, I would be completely covered with water. You can see the amount of destruction that the flooding has left here. People are now taking away the stuff from their homes. Basically, these homes were devastated by the flooding waters. Everything is just destroyed, and you can see that even now through the city. And it's just absolute post-apocalyptic view. Luckily, no one was killed in this city. We spoke with the police. They are trying to make sure that everyone is okay. But now people are returning to their houses, and these are really heartbreaking sights. Just seeing these people who have had all of their possessions devastated, seeing their sad faces. They have been battling with the elements for the past week. Trying to protect their houses, setting up sandbags and so on, but ultimately, yesterday they had to give up, and they had to surrender to the sheer power of the water as it swept through the city and took everything with it. Just left here a thick layer of ankle-deep mud.
Can you tell us how the evacuation and rescue missions are going, given the circumstances? I mean, from what you're describing and from what we can see, it's a really serious situation.
Right, so it's very difficult to say precisely affected by the evacuations because the situation is changing very, very rapidly. And then we spoke to the police and they told us that you have to really follow all of the statements because the situation can change from in just a second. You know, we are in the mountains and it's still raining. You can probably see that I'm standing in the rain. So the situation can change here very, very quickly. This area, from what we are hearing, is that probably the worst is already behind us. In the coming days, it should be better. But in the northern more parts of the region where the water is flowing to, there the people are worrying because we do not know how serious the threat will be, and so many cities north from here are bracing for the impact. Now the military is here working on the ground. Thousands of soldiers have been deployed from all over Poland. We see from time to time combat helicopters equipped with rescue stuff to help the rescue operations. We also see humanitarian aid being distributed to the people because there is no power, there is no running water, there is no gas. And it's difficult to get anything to eat here. So definitely very, very serious situation down here.
Owidiusz Nicieja reporting for us from Głuchołazy in Poland. Thank you so much for bringing us up to date, for letting us know what's going on there. Journalist Stephan Bachenheimer joins us now from southern Germany. Stephan, what kinds of risks are people facing in connection with the flooding that's happening there where you are?
Well, right here at the German-Austrian border, it has started raining again against all predictions, but nevertheless, there's supposedly no floods expected anymore. Maybe some in the southeastern part of Bavaria, the Berchtesgaden area, but otherwise rainfall is expected not to create too much drama. The real risk here is in the mountains because we had so much snowfall over the last couple of days that there is a severe risk of avalanches. We had an incident in the Karwendel Mountains in southeastern Bavaria where hikers were actually hit by an avalanche. A 72-year-old man is still missing. So that is the real risk. People hiking in the mountains. Mountain lodges had to be evacuated by helicopter. But with regard to rain, we are supposedly fine here.
OK, and Austria is bracing for a second wave with heavier rain expected in the coming hours. What could that mean there?
I think it will mean a lot of extra work in the next couple of days for the firefighters and the Austrian army. There are a couple of communities which are completely enclosed by water, where helicopters are flying in. There are still issues in Vienna, although the situation has eased, but subway lines being closed, highways being closed. So this is expected for a couple of days. Also, we see the Otterstein lake there where floodgates have been opened. That water goes down the Camp River into the Danube and then will finally end up in Eastern Europe and again create more drama over there.
Right. I mean, it's also the worst flooding to hit Poland in decades, isn't it? That's where the Prime Minister Donald Tusk has announced 230 million euros in emergency aid for the regions hit. We're going to have a quick listen to what he said earlier.
I've spoken to the finance minister and we've ensured a reserve of 1 billion zloty for areas and people affected by the flood. The finance minister has assured me that there will be no shortage of money, and that's for immediate and long-term aid.
So back to you, Stephan Bachenheimer. Now, that, of course, was the Polish Prime Minister talking about the situation in his country. Further south, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Romania have been hit really hard as well. Tell us a little bit about the situation there, if you could, and if there's any let-up in sight.
Yeah, there's still a lot of trouble. For example, in Slovakia, we have the old town of Bratislava, which is partly underwater. There are power outages, large scale, in the Czech Republic. We do have in Romania thousands of farmhouses underwater. So 10,000s, 100,000s of people are affected, and there's still a lot of emergencies, and we can't expect this to go on for the next couple of days.
Journalist Stephan Bachenheimer reporting for us from southern Germany. Thank you so much for bringing us up to date.